Welcome to Twice the Terror. I'm Ryan.
And I'm Kat.
And we are your hosts. That's right, the podcast that brings you twice the hosts, twice a month, with Twice the Terror. Kat, this week, and well, normally I ask you what are we talking about this week, but this week I'm bringing something to the table that I thought might be an interesting discussion. So if you don't like the discussion episodes, everybody, this is kind of going to be one of those off the cuff type episodes, but we are going to try to keep it a little short compared to our magnum opus that is Art Was the 90s Scarier. But so off mic, Kat and I were just talking about writing and different projects and stuff like that. And I've been rereading a lot of Goosebumps and a lot of, books of that sort of like demographic, bone chillers. And even I just picked up some of the Fear Street books, which are aimed at like a slightly older audience for like projects and stuff I'm working on. But it led me to this question, which was, is horror aimed at adults fun? Because here's the thing. I've been rereading young adult, horror books and stuff. And yeah, of course, they're not really scary as an adult. I mean, every once in a while you read something where you're like, that's way creepier or darker than like,
I remember
expected. Yeah, exactly. And then, of course, other stuff doesn't work. Like, it's perfect for the audience it's written for, like Goosebumps have like a lot of like fake outs and stuff like that where you're like, and there was someone standing there, and then it ends up being, like their dad or something, which is again great for the audience, and it's actually really great writing to get people to keep reading. But as an adult, you pick up on those things, or the language is simpler, things like that. But it made me start thinking, I was like, these are still really fun though. They're just so fun to read Goosebumps, or and they're quick reads, you're done in like an hour. But same thing with like shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark or Goosebumps or stuff. They're just fun. But then it made me start thinking, and I was scrolling through the internet, and a lot of people apparently have the same question, which is, why isn't there stuff written like that or shows made like that for an adult audience? You think about adult horror, and when I say adult horror, I mean stuff that's just aimed at an older audience. You typically, when you do that, your cast is their adult age, or might be more violent, or there might be subject matter that's darker or things like that. But like, it feels very rare that you have a story that is a simple like monster story or a simple like ghost story. It's always like super either dark or super analytical, where it's trying to like discuss the human condition. Or things
I'm thinking of movies like The Others.
Yes, and nowadays if you see a movie that looks maybe like more pulpy, more fun, it's typically they're trying to cut them down to PG-13, so they're almost dumbing things down. I would argue, I think, and maybe I'll think of something, but the last film I can think of that captured that fun spirit of like young adult horror, things like that aimed at a younger audience, but was still an adult thing, is Trick or Treat. Because that feels like an adult Goosebumps, right? You think about the stories in that, and it's like they're whimsical and weird and Halloween-y, but they're also way darker. People die in them and stuff, but they're that classic sort of EC Comics, creep show style thing.
Right, with the vignettes and
But you think about the movies that have been coming out lately, and it's either really like, and if you like these sort of movies, great, like what you like.
Your
but, like,
opinion's wrong.
Yeah, no, but like Blumhouse stuff,
yeah,
can often feel very dumbed down, where it's just like almost just like it's not fun, it's just stupid, versus like something like the A24 stuff, which tends to be a lot heavier and a lot more analytical and heady and things like that. There doesn't seem to be that same fun atmosphere you got out of 80s books and movies. Stephen King might be the last bit of that. That's like, he's always written very pulpy. And, some of his stories are definitely aimed at an adult audience. But I mean, you look at something like Christine, it's a haunted car story. R.L. Stine also has a haunted car story that was a Goosebumps book called The Haunted Car, and yet they kind of equate. It's about people being affected by a haunted car to some degree.
I feel like I could argue this only in the sense of like, I read a lot of Grady Hendrix, and I don't, if any of our listeners haven't heard of Grady Hendrix, absolutely love his writing. And a lot of his stories do have this like kind of quirky side to them while still very much being horror. Like My Best Friend's Exorcism, the power of Madonna compels you. Like, teenage girls in the 80s trying to save their friend from being possessed and trying to perform an exorcism through the powers of popular 80s pop stars. That is so not what you would expect. But I think it kind of encapsulates this sort of, I don't even know how to phrase it. I think it just captures this cartoonish aspect to
light horror. Not to say it's not dark or the subject matter is not dark, but it's not. And his name actually came up a lot. I haven't read any of Grady Hendrix's stuff, but it's been recommended because that is like name number one when people are like looking for like something that recaptures that magic, but like doesn't but isn't like aimed at a young audience. Which, by the way, speaking as an adult who reads Goosebumps, if you're an adult and you want to go read a Goosebumps book, read a fucking Goosebumps book.
Really?
Like, it's a good fucking time. Like, have a good time.
There's nothing stopping us.
No, exactly. As an adult, I also, want to read something that's fun like that, but isn't dealing with like, well, his wife died at the lake and, now he's in his mourning period. And then it's like, I don't
want to see 2 hours of fucking Johnny Depp walking around in a bathrobe. Like, fucking just get to the point. That's another, it's a Grady Hendrix book that I think kind of does that well. Like, the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. That one is specifically about a bunch of Southern moms who have a book club because they were kind of ousted from the major book club because they liked stuff that was like true crime. They liked the seedier kind of things. But these are still suburban moms. And when a vampire comes into their neighborhood, and it's not like your, traditional Disney, my mom's dating a vampire type story. Like, this is a scary fucking vampire, and he's going after their children and abducting children. And now these moms are, it's very much a story about, moms losing their children in a variety of ways. Not just actually losing them physically, but their children distancing themselves from them and no longer, like, because there comes a point in every parent's life when their child no longer wants to be associated with their parent. And I think that Hendrix did a really good job of bringing up that aspect of adulthood that I think a lot of people don't really talk about, specifically from a woman's perspective.
And that's the thing. Like, that's good to hear that, like, he's both tackling, like, fun stuff, but also dealing with, subject matter that's heavier and aimed at like, an older audience and things like that.
When you think about it, it's a fucking vampire. This is like crazy.
But and that's the thing. That's why, like I said, I brought up Stephen King. You can kind of throw Dean Koontz in that as well. That he's kind of got that like, but it is this thing where, like, sometimes I just want to pick up a book that's like 130 pages and just read something in an hour or two and be like, that was a fun story. Like, you don't. And like I said, Grady Hendrix's name seems to come up a lot. And but beyond that, you could argue, like I said, you could argue Stephen King, he does have some novellas, but also, like, sometimes, and I love Stephen King. Like, I have a huge Stephen King collection over here next to my R.L. Stein collection. But it is that thing of, like, sometimes I'm like, what do I want to read? And then I look over and I'm like, well, that's 1,000 pages. That's 1,000 pages. And it's kind of like, sometimes I don't want to sit there because my wife, Shannon, is a fast reader. She's someone who will, like, fly through stuff. But I intentionally slow down when I read because I want to get absorbed in the story. Like, I can read fast. It's not impossible. But sometimes I like to take my time with things because I want to really absorb and look at what I'm, reading and kind of like take it all in, as opposed to like flying through it like it's a textbook or something like that. And so when a book approaches like a huge length, there are definitely times where I'm like, I want to dive into that. And movies too were the same way, where I was trying to think of like fun horror movies I've seen recently, and everything I could think of was like stuff from the 80s. It was like show, of course, is like that same kind of like style based on the EC comics and stuff. Or even like I recently saw Vamp for the first time. I had never seen Vamp, and that was that same kind of tone. Like it's fun and kind of light and like, but still like a horror story and a horror movie, and, like, you know, has vampires and stuff, but it's campy and it's just like, but it doesn't lean into specifically horror comedy. I think that's the other problem is once you reach a certain threshold with horror, then they start putting things into the horror comedy category, which is, you know, it has to be funny to also be lighthearted. Which I don't think is
you can't do camp unless it's laughing at yourself. Right. I think, I'm worried about the death of camp personally. I just feel like there's people, a lot of producers, a lot of companies that are making films are too afraid to partake in a little bit of camp every now and then because, you know, everything has to be serious. If people are going to spend their hard-earned money and give you their attention for 2.5 hours, it seems like these days, in a theater, like if they're going to go through all of that to watch your, you know, you got to give them something spectacular. I think we lost the art of low budget, stupid camp.
Yeah. The days of, you know, the days of Roger Corman movies or pulp, you know, paperback novels. Like, I mean, yeah, you have stuff like, was it John Grisham or James Patterson? Like, you know, those guys that write like the
thrillers,
the old man novels, you know, the thrillers for like 50-year-old dads. Like, you know, those still exist, but your pulpy like sci-fi or your, you know, your short horror, you know, stuff, it seems harder and harder and harder to find these days. And I just wonder why that is, as someone who loves that stuff. The thing is, like, when you read like a book, you know, that's aimed at like and it depends too, right? Like there's a book like Coraline, you know, which is definitely like some adults find that story particularly creepy. But then, like, you know, most books are like, it's a monster, or it's, you know, it's vampires, it's mummies, it's, you know, stuff like that. But what they ultimately come down to is it's fear of the unknown, right? Like it's the idea of like you don't understand something and that makes it scary. And adult horror is typically the same thing. It's the idea of, it's like it's the fear of the unknown. But we don't like, and I don't know if it's because there's that like, we feel like there's like an adult disconnect where like, well, if you're afraid of a mummy, it's scary. Whereas, like, I think a really talented writer could write a terrifying book about mummies for adults or whatever it is. You know, it's just one example. So.
Or even with adult horror, it doesn't even necessarily have to be about the unknown. It could just be change. Because as you get older, you know, you become accustomed to what you do know. And then when things start to change, like it's less about what you don't know. It's more about like, fuck. I gotta get used to this whole new thing.
And that's the thing, like that's why like Romero's like zombie films always worked so well, because like, you know, they're always about something. But sometimes I remember I read, it might have been in his new book, but I also heard an interview with R.L. Stine where he was talking about, he's like, the reason I started writing some of the stuff I did, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but he's like, I hate that like there were, every kid's book, the idea was, well, there has to be a moral. There has to be like, what lesson did they learn? And he's like, I hate that shit. Because he didn't say I hate that shit. That's me putting words in his mouth. But like basically paraphrasing, he was like, I hate that because all I know is adults who reads. It's not like you read an adult book and it's like, what lesson did we learn at the end of the book? He's like, so like that's why I wrote Goosebumps the way I did. He's like, because kids don't want to learn something. The great thing about it is it got kids to read. But like,
if you make something a project for a child, they're less inclined to want to do it. It's kind of like how, this is gonna sound ridiculous, but it's kind of how Bluey works.
I was just about to bring up Bluey, so please continue.
If anyone has not watched Bluey, and I also want to point out I have a Bluey sticker on my water bottle, but Bluey is a show that is about casual play, like fantasy, kids playing. Sometimes there's a lesson, but it's so well hidden. Like a lot of kids aren't going to notice that. Like they think about this as being fun. This is entertainment. And it should, like, children are equally entitled to entertainment as adults are. Not everything needs to be work, not everything needs to be lesson driven. It is nice when it happens, but it's not the sole driving purpose. And
The other day it was when I was at a family gathering. We have some younger kids and stuff that are, part of the family. So Bluey was on in the background. And I started thinking about the show, and there's a huge audience of adults that are like, yeah, I watch Bluey.
Yeah.
And like I've never sat down to watch an episode myself, but like again, it's the same thing of like I get
dude.
it, right? Like
do it. It's great.
But
Stump Fest. That's the episode you need. Stump Fest.
Stump Fest. Okay.
Okay.
But it is that same thing of like I Googled it. I was like, and I Google auto completed it with just like, why do adults watch Bluey? Like because people are, and a lot of people are saying the same thing of just like, when the world is hectic and upsetting and my job sucks or this or that, like I can come home and I can watch something that's like wholesome but also not talking down to its audience. It's not stupid, and it's not trying to like, yeah, there's like morals to it or whatever, but it's not trying to like
shove it down your throat.
Yeah. And somebody asked the creator, and he goes, a good story is a good story. Like that's why I think people gravitate, is we try to just write good stories. Yeah, our stories are simple, and yeah, our target audience is younger, but if you like watching Bluey, go watch Bluey. Like that's
right.
And so I think that's kind of what I started thinking about it, and you'll see the same thing with Goosebumps. You'll find a lot of people Googling stuff like, I'm an adult. I'm in my late 20s, or I'm in my 30s and stuff. And is it wrong for me to want to read
still
a Goosebumps
like
book?
this thing?
Yeah. And people are like, no, as long as you're acting like an adult, like if you are using it as a coping mechanism, like
maybe think about that.
Maybe think about that, or go seek some, a therapist or someone to discuss it with, like, but if you're not using it for a way to like avoid being an adult or something, if you're just reading it because it's fun and maybe it's nostalgic, or maybe it's just like, fuck, I just picked up one of the newest Goosebumps books that came out because I was like, cool, he's starting a new series. Let me read this. And it reads like a Goosebumps book. It's fun. I fly through it. I'm like, yay! And then I'm reading the story. Like that's, what it came down to for me was, where do you think, Kat, is the disconnect between that sort of stuff and like writing aimed at adults? Why can't that gap seem to be bridged as easily? Again, you talked about Grady Hendrix, or we talked about, I think Michael Dougherty's really good with his, like Trick or Treat. Krampus was technically PG-13, but it's pretty messed up for a PG-13 movie, and it's like, but it's still fun, but it's dark, and it's like those movies and those books like bridge that gap really easily. But I think most people struggle to do that, and I wonder why that is. Why there's sort of a disconnect there.
I feel like my answer is gonna be really boring, but
no, please.
I think if anything's preventing this type of content from being made or being uplifted is money. Is there money into it? People are too afraid to put their financial backing behind something that isn't a guaranteed payoff. As well as like, there's always been this attitude, like especially recently, I feel like it certainly got greater during like the 90s and early 2000s, but that adult entertainment should be more elevated. Where everything needs to be like Inception. I think Barbie is a great example of like a movie that's great for children and for adults that covers a lot of topics without taking itself too seriously.
Right.
But again, it's like you have to be really careful about how you promote it and like make it clear that this is the Barbie movie and it's for little girls. But yeah, adults are going to go and see it. Okay.
Do you think that, and unfortunately we haven't quite gotten back to where it once was, but do you think that the 80s slasher is kind of the horror equivalent of
a pulp read?
A pulp read, yeah. Like, because it's totally like,
or at least a series read, like the little sci-fi novellas that used to be part of a series. My dad had like so many of those, and I think that kind of falls into that category of like, get a 150-page something, and then in 2 months the author shits out another one.
Right. And that's kind of and I think we're kind of missing that. I mean, we just had Eli Roth's Thanksgiving that came out last year, which I just watched.
Can we just have an Eli Roth episode?
We totally can. I have a lot. I have
feelings about this guy.
Yeah, me too. I have such weird mixed emotions about Eli Roth and his films, but yeah, no, I was thinking about that. I was like, because we just don't have that anymore. And I mean, we had the most recent Halloween films that like David Gordon Green did, but even he tried to impose this like, well, it's about communities falling apart, and I'm like, I just want to watch Michael Myers walk around, do his thing, and then like people run, and that's kind of I mean, it's the same kind of thing I get, as stupid as it sounds, from reading like a Goosebumps book. Sometimes it's like sometimes I want to nourish that like part of me that's more analytical. Sometimes I want to read a book that challenges me, or read or watch a movie that deals with subject matter that is maybe more, great.
But we have to use this processing power all day. Sometimes you just want to come home and just not really have to think.
Right. Sometimes I want to read a book where kids confront a scarecrow, or sometimes I want to watch a movie where Jason just walks around a camp and people flash their boobs and then they get killed. That's like, it's the same part of my brain, and I think that's why I'm like, we're missing that. You know what I mean? A little bit. Like we don't quite have that same sort of material that we once did for audiences. Now it's like I love movies that A24 puts out, Ari Aster's of the world, or you have movies by Robert Eggers and stuff, and that's stuff that's more challenging. But sometimes I just want to watch something that's not dumbed down, but that is just mindless. Like that is fun too. Like I want to go see like a slasher movie, or I want to go see, a dumb action movie. I don't know. Again, I'm probably rambling and spinning my wheels at this point, so we could probably wrap it up. But it was just a thought I had where I went, why doesn't that exist? Is it because that as adults, like our brains are too developed? Like we've had enough life experience now where like a simple story isn't good and we want to write more? Or is it more a matter of like, we think we want a more complicated story? You know what I mean? Like, well, it's like the ability to understand that as a kid, you like McDonald's because it's a treat, right? Like, or whatever, you go and you're like, yeah, I get a McDonald's, awesome, and you get a toy with it. As an adult, you recognize that it's junk food and you go, I shouldn't be eating McDonald's, Right. But as an adult, I fucking love McDonald's. Let me go get a Big Mac. Like, so that is that thing of like, yeah, I understand this is junk and this is not going to nourish my body all the time, but every once in a while, I want to go get a 10-piece nugget and a Big Mac and sit there in pajamas and like watch some trashy movie. You know what I mean?
I just need to know, I don't eat McDonald's. I actually don't eat fast food really at all. And I haven't unless like I'm on a really long road trip, which happens maybe once every 2 years or some shit. Or that's it. I think the last time I ate fast food was when the Halloween buckets came out of McDonald's. And I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna do it. And you talking about it just now made me want it. Isn't that disgusting?
But it is that, and yes, of course, there's like a lot of like, somebody could be like, well, it's because of corporate influence, and it's the fact that you were being. And I'm like, yes, I get, yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I know. I'm a simp.
I get,
I get
it. I understand, I do, but it is also that thing of like, I think it's okay, everything in moderation, right?
If anything, this episode's more of an advertisement to get outside your comfort zone and like look at some different shit.
Yeah.
Really, not everything needs to fit a formula.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I think that's a good way to put it. Like what you like, as we always say. Enjoy what you like. Don't.
But we've been let down so many times by the mainstream and the overhyped. Where even I know all the book talk girlies can say all the books that you get recommended on TikTok get hyped up so hard, and you start reading it, and you're like, this is straight ass. Yeah. But then then you have to go down that rabbit hole. You kind of have to look for that content, that entertainment.
Yeah.
And that scratches that there itch.
Absolutely. So if anybody out there kind of gets what we're talking about and understands what I'm saying, and if you have any recommendations for, movies or
that fit this bill,
books or any form of entertainment that are what we're talking about, it's something that has that sort of nostalgic, mindless vibe of like maybe there's something aimed at a younger audience or at a teen audience or whatever, but also fits the bill for adults, that like is like, great, this is something I can read or watch or whatever. Like, let us know, because we'd love new recommendations and we'd love to learn some more. I think this is a topic that would be interesting to revisit after reading or watching some new stuff and getting some new eyes on things and saying like, oh, maybe this does fit what I'm talking about, and maybe I just need to dig a little deeper. But I think that'll wrap us up for this one. Kat, do you want to close us out?
No.
Okay. All right, everybody, until next time.
See ya.